It would be hard to dismiss the idea that Sarai was not creative and clever. This is not to say her ideas were right, but we see her biggest idea grasped at desperation. From chapter 15, God tells Abram that he will have descendants, and they will not be servants but actual heirs. Chapter 16 starts out with Sarai and her indentured servant, Hagar, and a plan to create heirs for Abram and Sarai. Although we are not told for sure, it does not appear that Abram has shared the message he received from God with Sarai. But she does not seem to trust God's work in this situation. Another possibility I found from another study: it's possible she doubted that Abram's heir was meant to be born through her. Sarai has a plan for Abram to produce a child, or children, with Hagar. And this is a wild way of thinking. But when we go away from God's plan, our actions typically reek of desperation. Spurgeon explains that very likely Hagar was one of the slaves given to him by Pharaoh when he dismissed him and Sarah, and you know what trouble Hagar brought into the family. If Abraham had lived a separated life, and had not fallen into the customs of those round about him, he would not have had that sin and sorrow concerning Hagar, nor would he have had that righteous rebuke from Abimelech, the king of Gerar, when again he had acted deceitfully with regard to his wife. While it appears that Sarai did not trust what she had heard of God's plan, she did understand that God had control over her womb, but these words really hurt Sarai. She was tired of waiting, and was at the point of doing most anything to accomplish an heir. She was willing to go outside of God's plan, but as with the situation of Adam and Eve, and Adam not sharing the details with Eve, it appears the same is true here with Abram and Sarai, and she entertains the idea of a surrogate mother situation, or adultery. Although Sarai trusted that God was the one that made her womb barren, she did not trust that the plan given to Abram was going to happen, so much so she acted against the plan. It seems like she believes that Abram will become a father of many nations. But maybe she's not the mother. It's unclear what direction her thinking was in, but what's clear is she's confused. Perhaps worse is Abram went through with what Sarai offered to him. And while this may have been a normal custom during this period of time, it was outside of God's will. Perhaps it was God preventing them from having a child until he was ready. But Sarai did not want to wait anymore, and apparently neither did Abram. I say this because he goes through with the idea, and both acted out of unbelief. Abram had met personally with God, just like Adam had, so he knew what the plan was. But despite first-hand knowledge, he acted out of unbelief. We are all guilty of this at one point or another. For Abram, although he did not marry Hagar, he did commit adultery. We are told that it had been 10 years since the promise was made to Abram, so it's easy to understand why Abram and Sarai lost patience. 10 years is a long time, but this is why we are supposed to live by faith, not by sight. According to research, culture during this period perceived barrenness as a sign of divine disapproval, and while the plan to impregnate Hagar may have seemed like a perfect route around the barren problem, there was a curveball in that Hagar would come to resent Sarai. Honestly, who couldn't see this coming? For Sarai, Abram and Hagar conceiving a child was bad because she knew that was her fault. A failure on her end, not to be able to give a child to Abram. And their culture was very high on childbearing. According to culture, mothering the child of a wealthy and influential man like Abram gave a servant girl like Hagar greater status, and made her appear more blessed than Sarai. This led to Hagar thinking she was better than Sarai, so what was the need for Sarai? This whole situation was made worse because of an act of unbelief. Later, and not much later, Sarai blamed the whole situation on Abram. Let's be honest, she had a gripe with Abram indeed, as he should have acted as the spiritual leader, and told his wife that God was able to perform what he promised, and they didn't need to try to perform God's promise by disobeying him and relying on man's strength and wisdom. Because he did not, the situation literally became a Jerry Springer episode. Sarai acknowledges that Hagar despises her and is acting as though she's better than Sarai. It's clear that Hagar had no intentions of giving birth to a child of Abram and remaining a slave to Sarai. By Sarai explaining her feelings to Abram, I believe he realized the wrongs in his decision. But he made a mistake by allowing Sarai to handle the situation herself. But he put his relationship first, which was a good thing. However, the entire situation was a mess, and it's hard to see an easy or good way out. We are told that Sarai took care of the situation. At least she confronted Hagar and scolded her, which seems to have put fear into Hagar as she fled from Sarai. There is speculation that she headed back to Egypt, which is where she was from. But we read that Hagar's escape led her to a spring. Perhaps she was afraid to go further and leave this supply of water, but regardless, the angel of the Lord met her. The angel was in physical form, present, speaking to her just like another person. This is the first appearance of the angel of the Lord in the Bible, so think about this as the angel of the Lord first appeared to a single mother-to-be who had a pride problem and was mistreated by the woman who put her into the whole mess. Without question, God is a merciful and loving God. There are two important questions asked by the angel to Hagar. Two questions that each of us need to ask ourselves from time to time. Where have you come from, and where are you going? Hagar's response was different than most of ours. But we all have a story. She responded, I flee from the face of my mistress Sarai. The angel of the Lord tells her to return to thy mistress, and submit thyself under her hands. The child to be born will be used abundantly, as the seed will be used exceedingly. But it does appear that due to the plan being rushed, there will be consequences. The angel informs that the child will be a boy, a son, and his name will be Ishmael. Ishmael means God has heard, which is telling Hagar God heard and has stepped in. This should be a reminder to each of us that God hears. He still works, but it's on his timetable. Notice what God is doing here. For example, God not only implied a promise of protection, but he also gave a clear promise of staggering blessing. A fun note is Ishmael was the first person to be given a name before his birth. But not all of this lineage will be favorable. Ishmael apparently has a strong lineage, but he is not the promised child that God guaranteed Abram. The verse explains that Ishmael will be like a wild donkey, meaning he will not be a people person and will have hostility towards those around him. Again, back to the mercy of God, as he could have allowed Hagar and her unborn child to die in the wilderness. He didn't allow it. God specifically intervened so that wouldn't happen. According to the text, it appears that Hagar knew this visitor was more than just a regular person, describing him as the God who sees. It does appear that Hagar returns back to Abram and Sarai submissive, and gives birth to the child, naming him Ishmael. It's an important lesson for us all, and probably to Abram and Sarai, as well as their experiment attempting to bring about God's promise on their own timeline. They have learned he was still listening, still seeing, and would still keep his promises to Abram. Ishmael would be blessed by God, but his descendants would constantly be at conflict with others, and his birth came with bother, blessings, and burdens, which is what happens when we take things into our own hands.